Hello and welcome to a little walk around of my 1983 Triumph Acclaim L. So the Triumph Acclaim is the last car to be badged up as a Triumph. That's the car company, not the bicycle or motorcycle company, which are different entities. Built between 1981 and 1984. It's arguably not a Triumph. Some people don't consider these proper Triumphs, as they are essentially license-built versions of the Japanese market Honda Ballade, which itself is a four-door saloon version of the Mark II Civic. Now, these cars were built and assembled in the UK, but I believe that the engines and gearboxes were shipped in pre-built from Japan. But the car in design is essentially identical to a Honda Ballade with a few minor trim differences. So this came out in '81 and replaced the Triumph Dolomite series of cars, which was looking quite long in the tooth by the early 1980s. And British Leyland didn't really have the resources to design and manufacture a whole new car. So this was their solution. They entered this partnership with Honda to build the Ballade, and they badged it up as a Triumph. So these are much like the Dolomite. They're for a buyer who wants a small car which is slightly better equipped, a little bit more upmarket than your Austin or Morris. Which I think this provides that quite nicely. It's not really quite as sporty as the overhead cam Dolomite's, the 1850 and the Sprint, but it's a very worthy successor to the overhead valve cars, the 1300 and 1500. So this particular car is an Aberdeenshire car from new, sold by Ewans of Cornhill, which at the time was a BL dealership and then later went on to be a Honda franchise. It lived its entire life in the northeast of Scotland, essentially until about a year or two ago, where it travelled down a little bit further south and is now with me in Glasgow. I've seen this car knocking about since 2014, and purchased it in March of 2018. I've done about just over 4,000 miles in it as my everyday car, so it is a little bit scruffy. This is an L, which is the base spec. This was the lowest spec Acclaim you could get, although it's still relatively well equipped for a sort of early 80s car. So on the interior we have a tachometer, temperature and fuel gauges, and a speedometer. This car has done a genuine 65,000 miles. It done about 60, I think just over 61 when I bought it. Warning lights, low oil, battery, doors open, handbrake, choke, and ignition. Air vents, 3-speed fan. The only, for 83, you got this nifty digital clock. Prior to that, it was a sort of rotating drum style clock. This caused me quite a lot of problems, in that mine is constantly illuminated, and the reason for that is that this small black button here is supposed to turn the clock on and off, or illuminate it on and off, and mine is stuck on. So I've had to pull the fuse because otherwise it drains the battery. The only other difference I've made is I've pulled out the original AM radio and fitted this FM cassette player. And that's just to make the car a little bit more usable, because there's not really a whole lot broadcasting on AM these days. This car is a 5-speed manual gearbox. They also came with a 3-speed automatic, same as the Honda-matic gearbox, although in these they marketed it as the Triumph or Triomatic, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Oops. All the marketing is kind of just Triumph things glued over where the Honda stuff would be. Not much to it. The switchgear is all very, very Japanese. The car itself is very, very Japanese. Being L spec, this lacks a lot of things. On higher spec cars, you got a cassette player as standard, headlamp washers. This car doesn't have. Headrests, this car doesn't have. Even the base spec Dolomite's got headrests, but not in the Acclaim. What else are you missing? It's fairly well equipped for what it is, really. Got rear fog lights and a heated rear screen. A coin tray. Everybody loves a coin tray. An L is not supposed to have these rubbing strips. I don't know who fitted these or if they're a dealer fit thing when the car was new, but it's got them for whatever reason. You also got 145 profile tyres. Higher spec cars got 155 tyres, and I believe CDs, the top spec cars, got 165s, although I could be wrong at that. But it's relatively well equipped for what it is. There's nothing too special, but for the early 1980s, it's pretty good. This car is a little bit rough in places. It's rusty in the usual places where they all kind of go rusty. The blebs coming up on the front arches, the rear of the sills has had considerable amounts of work. The rear arches are almost entirely crafted out of fiberglass. The rear valance doesn't really exist, and the exhaust is garbage. It's kind of made out of bits of random exhaust, which are very similar but not quite a Triumph Acclaim exhaust. And it rattles. All of the original mounts have gone AWOL and been replaced by a selection of Jubilee clips. It's I've had better cars, but then it was also very cheap. So, and it's been very reliable, so I can't really complain about it. Have a quick look underneath the bonnet. This is the power plant. 1.3 litre Honda overhead cam with twin carburetors. Gives about 70 horsepower, which is more than adequate for a car this light. There's really no need for more power than that. Again, forward hinge bonnet. Very handy because it means that if the catch fails, it doesn't fly up and smash your windscreen. Thinking ahead, you see. Interesting selection of HT leads on this car. When I first got it and went to replace the plugs, I realised that the HT leads actually had old plug caps jammed in them. And although I managed to free one of them off, I couldn't get the remaining one, so that is a Triumph Dolomite HT lead that has been substituted in to keep the car running. You'll also notice the evidence of a past respray. Not a particularly good respray. This car should be Eclipse Blue. From what I understand, it is now Mercedes Steel Blue, which is a colour that they use on their current range of vans and commercial vehicles. Although it's damn near an exact match, as can probably be seen from bits where the overspray meets original paint. There's not really a whole lot in it. It might be a little bit lighter, but you wouldn't really notice. But overall, not a bad little car, especially considering how quickly these models rusted out. Some of the sheet steel is improbably thin. The only problems that this car suffers from really is a bit of a rough idle and the aforementioned exhaust. I've not had this car for very long, only a few months, but I've already done 4,000 miles in it. In everyday use, several trips up north to Aberdeenshire, a holiday around the west coast of Scotland, that was another 800 miles there, so it's pretty good. Condition wise, not too bad. Fair bit of welding I've had to do underneath, but all things considered, for the age of the car, it's pretty good. Interior is very nice indeed, wearing its original 65,000 miles quite well, I think. This is a base spec interior, all vinyl, door cards, cloth seats, no fancy tweed here. I have proper Acclaim mats in this car, which are so thick compared to modern car mats. They'll never wear out. I think I'll have them forever. I'm missing some trim here. There are some interesting electrical things that have been done to this car before that are not necessarily good quality. This car would have had lap belts in the back. Mine have gone AWOL. It doesn't legally need rear seat belts. I'm not quite sure where mine have gone though. They've been removed at some point for some reason. I also fitted a second speaker. L's only came with a single speaker. So I now have the... Not that it matters because the AM radio obviously only did mono, but since fitting this interesting new old stock beast, if it would focus, I now have FM stereo and cassette functionality. It's like living in the future. So, that's about all there is to say about this car. I shall take it for a spin.